Konnichiwa, and welcome to our second Japanese podcast. This podcast will focus on the Heian period, a time when Japanese arts and culture flourished. The Heian period lasted from 794 to about 1191 when the samurai and shogun rose to power. But before we get into the details of the Heian period, let's review our big idea for the unit and the essential question for this podcast. Our big idea: new civilizations are an evolution of previous civilizations. Essential question: what contributes to the advancement of civilizations? With that essential question in mind, let's take a look at how Japanese culture advanced during the Heian period. In our last podcast, we discussed the influence of both China and Korea on early Japanese society. During the Heian period, Japan was still influenced by China, but began to separate from some Chinese influences in ways that were uniquely Japanese. Let's take a deeper look into what Japanese culture looked like during the Heian period. Religion. Shinto, which is the traditional religion of early Japanese society, was still around, but Buddhism began to spread rapidly through Japan during the Heian period. Two forms of Buddhism became increasingly popular: Tendai Buddhism and Shingon Buddhism. Literature. It was considered a great honor to be a nobleman or noblewoman of the imperial court during this period. But to be part of the nobility means a member of the court, people had to come from an important family. They also had to look nice and be well-rounded in the ways of court life. To be an important individual, a person needed to be stylish and knowledgeable in arts and literature. Poetry, in particular, was a staple of court life. Nobles and ladies-in-waiting were expected to be well-versed in the art of writing poetry as a mark of their status. Every occasion could call for the writing of a poem, from the birth of a child to the coronation of an emperor, or even a pretty scene in nature. A well-written poem, or haiku, a haiku is a 3-line poem with 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, and 5 syllables in the third line. A well-written haiku could easily make or break somebody's reputation, and often was a key part of social interaction. Sometimes a nobleman would send a poem to a noblewoman that he wanted to maybe ask out on a date, and they would exchange poems back and forth until long before they even actually saw each other in person. Some of Japan's greatest works of literature came from the Heian period, including a person named Lady Murasaki Shikibu. Lady Murasaki Shikibu wrote a novel about life at the imperial court in a book called The Tale of Genji, which is widely regarded to be the world's first novel. Art. During the Heian period, artists began to separate themselves from Chinese influences by creating a type of painting they called Yamato-e, or Japanese painting. I know, it's a pretty original name, but Yamato-e eventually developed into 4 different distinct types. There were landscapes that showed the 4 seasons, places of natural beauty, I should say, people doing seasonal tasks, and scenes from literature, which were called story paintings. Literature and art were often combined in calligraphy to showcase the beautiful strokes a calligrapher made when writing. Performance arts were also popularized during this time with the advent of No. No theater was a classic form of Japanese drama that involved heroic themes, a chorus, and a dance. Beauty and style during the Heian period was considered an important part of what made someone a, quote, good person. In cosmetic terms, aristocratic or noblemen and women powdered their faces and blackened their teeth with iron. During this time, white teeth were seen as kind of ugly. So instead, they put iron in their tea, or they put iron in vinegar, and this iron blackened their teeth. This was called ohaguro. The male courtly ideal included a faint mustache and thin goatee, while women's mouths were painted small and red, and their eyebrows were plucked or shaved and redrawn much higher on the forehead. Women grew long, shiny black hair that was often longer than the lady was tall. Can you believe that? Having hair longer than you were tall? Whew, man, that's a lot of hair. And a courtly woman's formal dress included a complex 12-layered robe called a junihito, though the actual number of layers varied. Costumes and outfits were determined by office and season, with the women's robes in particular following a system of color combinations representing flowers, plants, and animals specific to a season or month. Well, all good things must come to an end, and the end of the Heian period, although known as Japan's Golden Age, there were many problems that would bring this period to an end. One reason is because the rich people who lived at court made up a small percentage of the population, and though they were very rich, they did not take care of the farmers and peasants and ignored their problems. Another reason for the decline of this period is because the emperor began giving large amounts of land away to the noble families, and these families did not have to pay taxes on the land. Soon the emperor gave away so much land that it reduced his power, and there were not enough taxes collected to support the emperor. Finally, in 1185, Minamoto Yoritomo, the head of one of these large noble families, used his military and his influence to take control of Japan. This takeover marked the end of the Heian period and the beginning of a new era, an era in which the samurai and shogun ruled Japan. But we'll talk more about that in our next podcast. See you later.